At the family meeting I said, "I can't wait for our trip." Then my dad laughed, and that laugh changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Stay with me through this story. It's not easy for me to tell, but maybe someone out there will understand how one moment can open your eyes to everything you never wanted to see. We were sitting around the dining table that Sunday evening, my dad, Walter, my stepmom, Cynthia, and my younger brother, Marcus. The air was heavy with that quiet tension families pretend not to notice. It was supposed to be a happy talk about our long-awaited summer road trip to Tennessee. We hadn't done something like that since my mom passed away 5 years ago. I'd been saving every extra dollar from my 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop in the mornings and another at a bookstore in the evenings, just to help cover the costs. It wasn't that my dad couldn't afford it. I just wanted to make it special. I thought maybe this trip could heal some of the distance between us. So when I smiled and said, "I can't wait for our trip," I expected laughter, maybe excitement. But instead, my dad let out this strange laugh, sharp and short, like a secret slipping out. The room froze. Cynthia kept her eyes on her phone, her fingers trembling just slightly. Marcus, who had been joking around a second ago, suddenly looked down at his lap. "What's funny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Nothing," Dad said, still smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Just you'll see." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I laughed too, awkwardly, hoping it was all in my head. But inside, I felt a quiet alarm go off, the kind you don't want to hear. Dinner dragged on, filled with forced chatter. Cynthia asked about my work schedule. Marcus mumbled about packing. But no one mentioned the trip again. Afterward, as I helped clear the table, I heard my dad's voice from the hallway, low but clear. "Well," he said to Cynthia, "she'll find out soon enough." I froze, the dish towel still in my hand. "Find out what?" Cynthia didn't reply. I peeked around the corner just enough to see her nod, her expression tight, like someone holding back tears. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it all. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was about a surprise or something harmless. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that whatever my dad's laugh meant, it wasn't good. And for the first time since Mom died, I realized, maybe the family I'd been trying so hard to hold together wasn't the family I thought I had anymore. The morning of the trip felt strange from the start. My dad was unusually quiet, moving around the house like he was late for something important. Cynthia kept checking her phone, typing fast, her face tight with stress. Marcus dragged his feet as he carried bags to the car. I tried to tell myself it was just the usual family tension before a long drive, but something about the air that morning felt heavy. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked out the window and tried to shake off the unease. This trip was supposed to be our new beginning. I'd told myself that over and over. Maybe once we hit the open road, we'd start to feel like a real family again. But an hour into the drive, I realized I was wrong. The atmosphere in the car was off. Cynthia was glued to her phone, texting nonstop, her face glowing with the screen's light even as the sun rose. Every few minutes, she'd tilt the phone away from me when I glanced over. My dad kept taking phone calls, speaking in low tones that were impossible to hear clearly. When I asked who it was, he just said, "Work stuff," and changed the subject. Marcus had his headphones in, tapping nervously at his leg, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I tried to lighten the mood, suggesting we play music or stop for breakfast, but my voice just floated in the silence. Nobody really answered. A few hours later, we stopped for gas. I stretched my legs, walked to the small store to grab a drink, and that's when I heard Cynthia's voice around the corner near the vending machines. She was whispering into her phone. "We just need to tell her after the weekend," she said. Her tone was tired, almost defeated. My heart jumped. "Tell who? Tell me what?" Before I could move closer, she turned and saw me. Her face froze for a second, then she forced a small smile. "Just talking to your aunt," she said quickly. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my hands were shaking as I twisted open my soda bottle. Something was being kept from me. Back in the car, I opened my small travel notebook, the one I used for journaling, and began writing everything I'd noticed since that family meeting. The laugh, the whispers, the strange behavior. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I wanted a record. Something to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. As the highway stretched on, my mind drifted back to my mom's final days. The hospital, her quiet voice, and how quickly Dad had remarried after she passed. I'd pushed that thought away for years, but now it came rushing back with new meaning. By the time we reached the lakeside cabin, the sun was setting over still water. It should have felt peaceful, but all I felt was a quiet dread that this trip wasn't about family at all. The cabin looked peaceful from the outside, tall trees, quiet water, and the smell of pine all around. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt uneasy. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the way everyone moved around each other without speaking much. Cynthia went straight to unpacking groceries. Marcus disappeared into his room with his headphones. My dad took a phone call on the porch, his voice sharp and low. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really, I was watching them. Everything about this trip felt wrong. The smiles were forced, the laughter hollow. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, but that feeling in my chest, the one that had started at the family meeting, wouldn't go away. Dinner that night was quiet. My dad talked about fishing, Cynthia smiled too quickly, and Marcus barely touched his food. I kept nodding, pretending to listen, but my mind was far away. After everyone went to bed, I stayed up, restless and unable to sleep. I walked into the kitchen for some water, the cabin dim except for a small night light near the counter. That's when I saw it, a small, folded envelope tucked beside the silverware drawer. My name was written on it in familiar handwriting, for Imani. For a moment, I froze. My breath caught in my throat because I recognized that handwriting anywhere. My mom's. My hands shook as I opened it carefully, the paper soft from age. The letter was dated 2 months before she passed away. Her words were shaky but clear. My sweet Imani, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped would never come to light. Your father has betrayed both of us. I can't say everything now, but please don't trust what he tells you about money or what he says was for your future. Be careful, my love. Some truths hurt, but they will protect you in the end. I read it over and over, my heart pounding louder each time. Betrayed? Money. What was she trying to warn me about? I looked toward the hallway. My dad's door was closed. I could hear Cynthia's faint sniffling. Maybe she'd been crying again. Marcus was probably asleep. I folded the letter and slipped it into my bag. My hands were still trembling. My mind raced with questions, memories, everything that suddenly made no sense. How Dad sold Mom's car so fast. How he'd avoided talking about her life insurance. How he never let me see any paperwork. Standing there in that quiet kitchen, I realized something I didn't want to admit. The man I called my father might have been hiding things from me, maybe even stealing from me. I turned off the light and walked back to my room, pretending nothing had happened. But deep inside, something had changed. From that moment, I couldn't look at my father the same way again. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I helped Cynthia make breakfast, teased Marcus about sleeping late, and even smiled at my dad when he came down the stairs. But inside, my mind was spinning. Every time I looked at him, I saw my mother's handwriting in that letter, warning me. Over coffee, I decided to test the waters. Hey, Dad, I said casually, do you ever miss Mom's things? You know, the jewelry she used to wear? I was just thinking about her old gold necklace, the one she said she'd pass down to me someday. His eyes hardened. That stuff was just collecting dust, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Why do you ask? I just thought maybe I could have one of her pieces. Something to remember her by. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It's gone, Imani. Don't live in the past. Gone. The word hit me like a slap. I felt my throat tighten. Gone. What do you mean gone? He sighed, irritated. I sold a few things after she died. We needed money back then. Don't make a big deal out of it. Marcus looked up from his plate, eyes wide. Dad, he started, but stopped when Walter glared at him. That glare said everything. I didn't push further. Not yet. But I caught Marcus alone later that afternoon near the porch. He was sitting on the steps, staring at the lake. I sat beside him. You knew, didn't you? I asked quietly. He hesitated, picking at his nails. I didn't mean to. I just overheard Dad one day. He said the jewelry was pawned. Pawned? I repeated. He nodded. He said it was to fix a mistake. Something about Cynthia. I don't know what that means, but he made me promise not to tell you. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mother's jewelry, her memory, gone because of some mistake? That evening, when Dad went out to make another one of his work calls, I went to Cynthia's room. She was sitting at the vanity, taking off her earrings. When she saw me in the mirror, her shoulders tensed. Cynthia, I said quietly, what mistake did Dad cover with Mom's jewelry? Her hands froze. She didn't answer at first. Then, with a shaky sigh, she turned around. Imani, please, it was complicated. Your father made some bad financial choices. He promised he'd fix it, and She stopped herself, tears forming in her eyes. We pawned the jewelry to pay off something he owed. I didn't want to, but he insisted. My stomach churned. You could have told me. He told me not to, she whispered. Please, Imani. Let it go. For your own sake. As she reached for my hand, I noticed a faint bruise on her wrist. Before I could say anything, the front door slammed. Heavy footsteps. Walter's voice thundered from the hallway. What the hell are you two talking about? Cynthia's face went pale. My heart pounded as I met his glare. In that instant, I knew this wasn't just about secrets or money anymore. It was about fear and control. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the lake outside should have been calming, but every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard my father's voice echoing through the cabin, sharp, commanding, angry. I kept replaying the moment he'd burst into the room, Cynthia's frightened eyes, and the bruise on her wrist. Something inside me snapped. I needed answers, and I wasn't waiting for him to give them. When the cabin finally grew quiet, I slipped out of bed. My heart was beating so loud I was sure someone could hear it. I tiptoed down the hallway toward my dad's study, the one room he always kept locked. The handle didn't budge, but I'd seen him leave the spare key above the doorframe earlier in the trip. My fingers trembled as I reached up and found it. The door clicked open. The smell of tobacco and old paper hit me immediately. His desk was neat, too neat, like he didn't want anyone to see what was missing. I started with the drawers. Bills, old letters, tax papers. Then, buried under a stack of files, I found a brown folder labeled with my mother's name, Elaine Cross. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and something that made my breath catch, a draft of my mother's will. The signature line was blank, and some sections were crossed out. But the numbers told the truth. Her estate money, everything she had been rerouted into a joint account under Walter and Cynthia Cross. My father and his new wife. I stared at the papers until the lines blurred. My mom's voice echoed in my head from the letter. Don't trust what he says about money. She had tried to warn me. I turned to another folder and froze. Printed emails, between my dad and someone named Ava. The name looked familiar. Then it hit me. Ava was his secretary from when Mom was still alive. The dates on the messages overlapped perfectly with Mom's hospital stays. My stomach turned as I read lines like, she won't suspect a thing, and we'll talk after visiting hours. There was nothing explicit, but it didn't have to be. The timing said everything. I sat there for a long time, staring at those pages, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about loyalty, love, and how easily he had replaced my mother, and lied to me. Quietly, I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every document, every email. I transferred them onto my USB drive, the one I always carried for work, and slid everything back exactly how I found it. As I locked the door behind me, my reflection in the glass caught my eye. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The grief that once softened me had turned into something sharper. Anger, steady and cold. I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not until I had every piece of the truth. Because this time, my revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. Dinner the next night felt like a performance no one wanted to be in. The table was set, candles flickering, food steaming, but no one spoke much. Marcus poked at his mashed potatoes. Cynthia sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she passed the bowl of vegetables. My father, as always, acted like everything was fine. Laughing too loudly, asking about my job, pretending we were some perfect family on vacation. But I wasn't pretending anymore. I'd seen too much. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and said, I've been thinking a lot about family honesty lately. The clinking of silverware stopped. My dad looked up, a slice of roast still on his fork. Honesty? He repeated, his tone flat. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice calm. How sometimes people hide things to protect others. But I think the truth always finds its way out, don't you? Cynthia's eyes flicked to mine, then quickly to her plate. My father leaned back in his chair, suspicious. Sounds like you've been reading too many of those self-help blogs, he said with a smirk. I smiled, pretending not to notice the tension tightening the air. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just learning that secrets have a way of showing up when you least expect them. Marcus looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Can we not do this right now? He muttered. Do what? My father snapped. We're just talking. But his voice was sharp, defensive. I decided to go further. I lifted my glass and looked straight at him. You know what? Let's make a toast. To Mom, the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. The room went silent. Even the sound of the crickets outside seemed to stop. Cynthia's fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto her plate. My father's smile vanished. His face turned red. What are you trying to say, Imani? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. I met his eyes and said softly, I think Mom's still watching. And she's disappointed in you. The air cracked like thunder. He slammed his glass down so hard that red wine splashed across the tablecloth. Marcus jumped. Cynthia flinched. Watch your mouth, he hissed. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not everything, I said, keeping my tone even. But I know enough. His jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually get up and yell. Instead, he stared at me cold, hateful, before looking away. Cynthia's eyes filled with tears. She pushed her chair back slowly. I'll clean this up, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then she stood and walked out of the room, covering her mouth with her hand as she passed me. The only sounds left were the faint dripping of spilled wine onto the floor and my father's heavy breathing across the table. In that silence, one thing was certain. The truth had finally stepped into the room, and there was no way to send it back out. It was well past midnight when I heard the knock on my door, soft at first, then a little louder. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. For a second, I thought it might be my father, but then I heard a shaky voice whisper, Imani, it's me. I opened the door to find Cynthia standing there in her nightgown, eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked smaller somehow, like the life had been drained out of her. She clutched a crumpled tissue in one hand and whispered, Can I come in? I nodded, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, glancing toward the hallway like she was afraid he might appear out of the shadows. I closed the door behind us, locking it. For a few seconds, she just stood there, trembling. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I can't keep doing this, Imani. I can't keep pretending. I moved closer, keeping my tone gentle. Pretending about what? She looked at me, tears spilling over. About your father. About everything he's done. You were right to ask questions. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking. When I met your dad, I had just come out of a messy divorce. I had nothing. He told me he could help me start over, give me stability. He said he was handling your mother's finances and needed someone he could trust to move things around, just temporarily. I believed him. My stomach twisted. He used you to hide the money. She nodded slowly. Yes. It wasn't until after we got married that I realized what I'd agreed to. He rerouted your inheritance, put it in our joint account so it looked like I was involved. If I ever tried to leave, he said he'd make it look like I stole from you. Her words hit me like a blow. I wanted to be angry, but looking at her, shaking, broken, terrified, I just felt a deep sadness. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked softly. I was scared, she said, her voice cracking. He controls everything, the money, the house, even my phone. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But tonight, when you said what you did at dinner, I saw his face. He's losing control, Imani. And that terrifies me. I reached for her hand. Then let's end it together. She looked up, startled. What do you mean? I mean, we expose him. Every lie, every document, every dollar he stole. But we do it smart. There's a family gathering coming up next weekend, right? She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. That's when we do it, I said firmly. In front of everyone. No more hiding, no more fear. For the first time since she walked in, Cynthia managed a weak smile. You sound like her, she whispered. Your mother. I squeezed her hand. Then let's make sure she finally gets the justice she deserves. The day of the family gathering felt too bright for what was about to happen. Sunlight poured through the windows of my aunt's house. Laughter echoed in the backyard, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Everyone was there, cousins, uncles, old family friends. My father stood in the middle of it all like a king at his throne, his arm around Cynthia, smiling wide, charming as ever. He was telling a story, loud enough for everyone to hear, about how proud he was of his perfect family. People clapped and nodded, hanging on to his words like he was some kind of role model. I watched him, smiling like everyone else, but inside my stomach churned. I knew the truth behind that grin, the lies behind every word. Cynthia stood beside me, her hands clasped tight. She'd barely spoken all day, her face pale. I gave her a small nod. It was almost time. When my dad raised his glass to give another speech, I stepped forward. Before you do that, Dad, I said, keeping my tone cheerful, Can I say something? He smiled proudly, oblivious. Of course, sweetheart. Go ahead. I turned to face the crowd, forcing a light laugh. I just wanted to make a toast too, to family, to memories, and to truth. The room quieted a little, everyone turning toward me. My dad's smile faltered, but only slightly. Go on, he said. I held up a folded paper, the letter I'd kept hidden all this time. I found this recently. It's from my mom. She wrote it before she passed away. Cynthia's breath hitched beside me. I opened the letter, my hands steady even though my heart pounded. Then I began to read aloud. My sweet Imani, if you're reading this, your father has betrayed both of us. Don't trust what he says about money. Protect yourself. The room went silent. Forks froze midair. A few people gasped. My father's face turned pale, then red. What is this? He barked. Imani, that's private. I ignored him. I reached into my bag and pulled out printed documents, copies of the receipts, bank transfers, and the unsigned will. Mom's estate money, I said, my voice clear and cold. It didn't disappear. It was rerouted to Dad and Cynthia's account. Every cent. Murmurs rippled through the room. My aunt covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Walter's mask cracked completely. You don't know what you're talking about, he shouted, his voice shaking. Yes, I do, I said, meeting his glare. You stole from her. From me. Cynthia stepped forward then, her voice trembling but steady. She's telling the truth. I helped him hide it. I was scared, but not anymore. Everyone turned to her. My dad looked stunned, speechless for once in his life. Marcus, who'd been sitting quietly at the table, stood up suddenly. His face was red, his eyes wet. Dad, you did this? He whispered. No one said another word. The perfect family image shattered right there, under the weight of truth, guilt, and my mother's voice echoing through her letter. Walter's voice boomed through the living room, but the more he shouted, the smaller he seemed. His words had lost their power. You think you can embarrass me in front of my family? He roared, slamming his hand on the table. Glasses rattled, but no one flinched. The charm that had carried him all his life was gone, stripped bare under the weight of truth. Imani stood still, her face calm. The storm around her didn't shake her anymore. You embarrassed yourself, she said quietly. All I did was open the curtains. He turned to the crowd, desperate. You all know me. I built this family. I took care of everyone here. His eyes darted between his siblings, old friends, and Marcus, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. But no one spoke. Aunt Denise crossed her arms, her expression hard. You built it on lies, Walter. Don't stand there and act like the victim. Cynthia stood a few steps behind Imani, trembling, her tears smudging her makeup. But when Walter's glare turned toward her, she didn't shrink this time. I'm done covering for you, she said softly. You made me a part of this mess, and I won't carry it anymore. That cut deeper than any accusation. Walter's face twisted, part fury, part disbelief. You ungrateful. Marcus slammed his chair back. Stop. His voice cracked. You don't get to yell at her. You don't get to yell at anyone. You lied to all of us. Walter froze, realizing that even his son had turned against him. The relatives' whispers grew louder. Words like lawyer, inheritance, fraud floated in the air. Someone pulled out their phone, recording. Another relative said, We should call the police. This isn't just family drama anymore. Walter's shoulders dropped. For the first time, he looked old. Cornered. Powerless. Imani didn't gloat. She just looked at him, that cold, distant calm still on her face. You took from Mom, and you took from me. You can't take our peace anymore. Then she turned, grabbed her bag, and walked out. Cynthia followed her, wiping her eyes. Marcus hesitated only a moment before he joined them, leaving their father standing alone in a room full of people who finally saw him for what he was. Outside, the evening air was cool and quiet. Imani unlocked the car, and the three of them got in. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of insects and the fading murmur of voices behind them filled the silence. Finally, Cynthia whispered, What happens now? Imani started the engine, her eyes fixed ahead. We rebuild, she said simply. In the days that followed, word spread fast. Walter's reputation collapsed like a rotted house. His business partners withdrew, relatives pressed for legal action, and Cynthia filed for separation within the week. Imani didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction, only stillness, the quiet kind that follows a long storm. This was never about revenge. It was about balance, about reclaiming what was stolen, dignity, truth, and the right to her mother's memory. The lake was still that morning, the water smooth as glass, reflecting the soft gray sky. Imani sat on the same wooden bench where she'd once stood with her family months ago, the same place where the trip had begun. Back then, the air had felt full of promise. Now it was quiet, honest. She took a deep breath and watched the small ripples move across the surface. The smell of pine and wet earth filled the air. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel tense. She didn't feel angry. Just calm. A kind of peace that didn't need words. Cynthia now lived a few towns away in a small house near the hills. She'd started her own catering business. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep her going. She called Imani every few days just to check in, her voice lighter than before. The bruise that once marked her arm was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet strength. Marcus had started therapy, something Imani had encouraged. He was slowly opening up about the things he'd seen and the guilt he'd carried. Sometimes he'd send her messages late at night, just little things like, "Thanks for not giving up on me." It reminded her that not everything was lost. Some parts of the family could still be saved, even if others couldn't. Imani looked down at the rippling water and thought about her father. She hadn't seen him since that day at the gathering. The last she heard, he was fighting legal battles and living alone. A part of her once wished for an apology, but she'd stopped expecting it. Some people never face themselves. They just run from the truth until it catches up in silence. Her fingers brushed against a small folded paper in her pocket, a copy of her mother's letter. The original was safe in a box at home. She'd read it so many times the words were carved into her heart. Her mother's warning wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about strength, about finding courage even when the truth breaks you first. She smiled faintly, her eyes on the horizon. The water shimmered under the soft morning light, gentle waves touching the shore. It was strange how life came full circle. How one moment, one laugh, could unravel everything you thought was solid. "I waited for that trip my whole life," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Turns out, it was just the road back to the truth. For a while, she sat there in silence, listening to the quiet hum of nature. Birds in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Then slowly she stood. The world felt lighter now, not because it was perfect, but because she had stopped carrying its lies. As she walked away from the lake, the air shifted, cool, steady, and full of something that felt almost like strength. Do you think Imani made the right choice by walking away to protect her peace? Or should she have tried to rebuild what was left of her family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really love to hear what you think. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.